representative, well, Mike Knapp with Congresswoman Titus's office there in the back. We have a few representatives from Senator Reed's office, Jack Finn, Asha Jones, Gabrielle Matute. If they haven't all arrived, they're on their way or trickling in. Marion Williams with Representative Horsford, Congressman Horsford's office. Linda Young, I'm not sure if she's here, school board trustee also, and an SNRPC member. And Patricia too, also at the school board. Thanks so much everyone for coming. So again, my name is Lisa Corrado. I'm the project manager for Southern Nevada Strong. We have a really exciting presenter here with us today, but before we transition into the topic for his presentation, I'd like to give some background on what is Southern Nevada Strong. So Southern Nevada Regional Planning Coalition received a $3.5 million grant to develop a regional plan from a federal agency, from HUD, to provide this really robust outreach process and analytical support to develop a plan for the region to address some of our community's challenges and to leverage the things that we're doing well on. The program is called the Sustainable Communities Initiative. It's actually a pilot program that's funded partially by HUD, DOT, and EPA. They all came together and said, we really need to fund projects differently. Instead of throwing transportation money here and smart growth money here and housing money here, we need to kind of practice what we preach on having a more integrated approach to how we develop communities, and we need to coordinate the way we fund these projects ourselves. And so they created this pilot program that's the Sustainable Communities Initiative, and is the resource that allows us to have great events like this and to do much of the work that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. There's about 140 grantees across the country, and the assistant director of DOT likes to share this tidbit that it's easier to get into Harvard University actually than it is to get a Sustainable Communities Initiative grant. So kudos to Southern Nevada for getting this. Also, the project is managed by the City of Henderson and administered by the City of Henderson, so kudos to the City of Henderson for taking on this project too. Before we get into too much more detail on Southern Nevada Strong and our sort of scope of work, I wanted to touch on the perspective that Southern Nevada Strong has in addressing the topics that we're going to talk about today with John. We are coming from a place-based approach. There's several different ways to direct policy interventions, and the perspective that we have is really from a community development or place-based approach. So what is community development? It's defined in so many different ways. It can be economic development, housing, job training, service provision, quality of life improvements, but basically it's all directed towards a specific geography. That geography could be a region, it could be a neighborhood, depending on what scale you're working at. Southern Nevada Strong sort of goes back and forth between regional and local, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in some subsequent slides. Place-based policy then is the set of interventions that works toward improving a community. We are trying to distinguish this role because we have mutually supporting goals with other initiatives that are directed more at individuals or institutions or the population as a whole. We are really trying to provide the places that allow some of the improvements to take place so that we can work hand in hand. I'll give you an example. Healthy communities is one of the topics in our regional planning effort, and there's a lot of different initiatives working on education around health and awareness about nutrition and mobility and getting more opportunities for fitness. And we are trying to promote policies and strategies that would allow for that walkability, to allow for more coordinated land use mixes so that people can walk from home to work or to retail and other places. So we're looking at things from that built environment standpoint. And looking at things from a place-based perspective also prioritizes the look and feel of a place, not just a more traditional definition or category of land use. Southern Nevada Strong's role then is to promote initiatives that would support these things, whether it's economic development or health or transportation, that we provide a land use mix and urban design standards that would support transit and those other initiatives that many of you are working on as well. We do go back and forth between community and region through our work plan. We're developing these sort of abstract policies to promote things like pedestrian-friendly environments and safe environments. But we're also going to the community level through our demonstration site work, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But basically the demonstration sites are how do you apply some of these abstract policies to a specific place. So if we say that we care a lot about pedestrian safety, how is that applied at a site-specific level? And so that's also the closest way we can get to implementation through a planning process. Our planning horizon for this project is a 30-year planning horizon, and to get a little bit closer to implementation, we are trying to model some of those policies on the ground and talk about what types of incentives might be necessary, what types of regulatory change might be necessary to really see those policies applied in a specific place. And then this last point, it's a White House directive. We are a federally funded project. Many initiatives and grants now coming out of the federal agencies are looking at place-based interventions. They really want to see a community come to consensus on some of these initiatives, and then they fund implementation of those initiatives rather than saying this is the type of money we have available, show me a project that does this. It will take a long time for that transition to take place, but again, this is a pilot project that the federal administration is really looking to be more of an implementer and have the local community be the vision and the plan for its future. Just a couple examples. These are federal examples. They were kind of easy to replicate from the Office of OMB, Office of Management and Budget, I think. So examples on the yes side are designed to create an intervention at a local community level. It may be a region, it may be a city, but in a geographic context. And then the ones that are not a place-based intervention are targeting things like businesses generally, borrowers generally, and some housing programs. The unemployed, several different workforce development programs may target the unemployed as a category rather than looking at a specific community that has a high rate of unemployment. Sometimes these things work hand in hand, but we want to pair some of the interventions that are not place-based, not spatial in nature, with the things that are. So with the tools that we have from a local government perspective and other groups that focus on targeted neighborhoods or communities, so that we have some complementary initiatives working to improve things at the individual level as well as at the neighborhood or community level. Some other examples that may be familiar also, redevelopment agencies are examples of place-based policy interventions, business improvement districts, neighborhood improvement districts. Those are some familiar examples too. So kind of shifting gears, I think I wanted to make sure that we all have sort of a mutual understanding of what are the things that Southern Nevada Strong is hoping to influence, and now getting back to how we're going to do that. So this is a 3-year planning grant. The first year was primarily spent on governance, developing the consortium committee, the consortium agreement that was adopted by each of the partner organizations. There's, I think, 13 partners to the project that all have an in-kind role, staff time primarily, participating in the project, and members of the SNRPC. Because we're under the SNRPC, all of the local governments and school district are a part of the consortium as well. We also began with some research and analysis to start framing some of the challenges that we're aware of, but further detail on some of the challenges that we face. So that was the first year. The second year, we're in the middle of the second year about right now, and we're focusing on community involvement and outreach. We kicked off the project in February at Meet Las Vegas downtown, and ever since then we've been frantically hosting community open houses, going to speaking engagements, participating at third-party events, doing intercept surveys. We've gathered a ton of data and are continuing that process. We actually have an open house this Saturday at the West Sahara Library. If you'd like to come, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the third year is back to what I mentioned about the demonstration site work. The third year we'll be doing the site analysis on opportunity sites or demonstration sites that are moving forward in the process, and talking about how do we apply these principles of better integrating housing, transit, and jobs in specific places. So that's the example of going back and forth between local context and regional policy. Also in the third year, we'll be gathering input on the draft elements of the plan. We'll be developing those by the end of this year, and then getting community input and hosting another series of open houses to get input on the plan itself. This is a little bit more detail on year 2, what it looks like. We'll be doing our open houses through September using a variety of stations and an online survey tool that we'll share with you in a minute. Develop the draft plan, ask the SNRPC to accept the plan, and then continue getting input on that draft plan throughout the period of the grant. The process to this project is just as important, if not more so, than the plan itself. We are using a lot of different resources and technologies to gather input from the community. We did a statistically valid telephone survey in February and oversampled on some hard-to-reach audiences to start pulling some themes from the public on what we should be focusing on. And we learned through that process that a good quality education and good jobs are the top 2 priorities on residents' minds, which was very consistent with stakeholder interviews that we did with community leaders. So across spectrum, there's really been consistent feedback on those themes. The task groups I've mentioned a little bit, but we have 6 task groups. Each one has a chair that has a seat on the consortium. Public engagement and equity, transportation, environment, economic development and education, healthy communities, and housing are the elements of the plan, or the topics that we're addressing through this process. And each of those sit on the consortium committee, which is the next level, the advisory group to the SNRPC. That has about 25 people in it. We have a list of their names coming up here. And they are made up of an elected official, a non-SNRPC elected official from each entity, a city or county manager from each entity or their designee. The task group leaders are they are subject matter experts in their fields. And then we are under the purview of the SNRPC, looking to the SNRPC for guidance and ultimately adoption of the plan. We will also ask that each of the local entities voluntarily adopt the plan. This is the consortium committee. They're a critical body for the project, and many of them are here today. The consortium committee was recruited to make sure that we had a nice cross-section of the community from a variety of perspectives, from nonprofit, private, and public sector, as well as racial and ethnic minority representation, and also as project champions that really believe in the principles of this project and the goals that the funder is looking for us to address. So then the next question is, who will implement the plan? Well, we're hoping that we develop this as a toolkit so that there's a lot of encouragement and support and consensus from the public input that we've developed, that there will be voluntary adoption by the local governments and recognition of the strong base of knowledge that they can implement at the local level. Of course, other partners too that are here also today, UNLV, RTC, the Housing Authority, other groups that are working hard at some similar topics. Just a sort of ending note on the benefits of planning. Why are we looking at the community in this way, and how do we intervene in a place-based way? There are really strong and positive relationships between some of the things that we're hoping to achieve through this plan and other things that we care about. For example, high walkability or a good walk score increases is associated with increased home values. People, especially millennials, are choosing where they want to live first and then looking for a job. So cities have to really take a hard look at how they are competing with other metropolitan regions, and are they appealing to that cohort, especially as far as economic competitiveness. There are also health benefits. Data tells us that walking 10 minutes a day as a part of your daily routine actually does more for your health long term than a vigorous workout 3 to 5 times a week, which is why I don't go to the gym anymore. We can also improve quality of life by reducing household costs associated with reliance on cars to allow people to be able to spend money on other things. we've seen some different statistics that each person who has a car spends about $6,000 a year on that car, whether it's through payments, maintenance, gas, all of those things. So if we could reduce the reliance on cars, then we could free up to $6,000 a year for families, which makes a big difference when it comes to school supplies and healthcare and nutrition. So we, as I mentioned, have this robust public outreach process, and we would love to get you all more involved, get your input in a variety of ways. We recently launched a series of open houses. We have about 13 open houses that we're holding all over the region. We've got 2 under our belt now and have another one this Saturday at the West Sahara Library from 2:30 to 4:30. We invite you, your staff, constituents, students, teachers, anyone in the area that would like to drop by anytime between 2:30 and 4:30. We also can bring our outreach toolkit to you. So if you have a captive audience that you would like to give the opportunity to participate in this planning process, we can come to you. We did an event last week with the Monte Carlo, and we're there from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. gathering input from all of the different shift workers there. We also, if you cannot make it to an open house, our online survey is on our website, southernnevadastrong.org. This is what it looks like. We have preliminary priorities on this page that you can click through and give a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the different policy priorities that you see for all of the different topics that will be addressed through the plan. We also have the opportunity sites. There's 12 opportunity sites that have been identified thus far, and you can rank which ones you think really provide the most opportunity to better connect transit, housing, and jobs. So we'll have that online tool live until September or early October, so we're trying to get as much of that data as we can through the end of September. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis Perea. He's the Assistant Director with the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation, who is going to introduce our guest speaker, our featured speaker today. Dennis is on the Economic Development and Education Task Group, and has given great feedback already on this process, and thank you so much.
Thanks. Afterwards, we can commiserate about not going to the gym together. As she said, I'm Dennis Perea. I serve as the Deputy Director for the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation, and I do participate on the Economic Development and Education Task Group for Southern Nevada Strong. Director Frank Woodbeck and I got involved with Southern Nevada Strong because through the planning and outreach process, we discovered the project is working on a variety of policies from housing to transportation to economic development and education to encourage a more economically resilient future. We want to make the community more appealing for a talented workforce and diversify the economy so we aren't as susceptible to boom and bust cycles like the tragic one we just went through. Southern Nevada Strong's regional plan will seek to sustain and build on our current strengths and unique economy. Director Woodbeck is also on the steering committee for the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy known as the SEDS through the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. Southern Nevada Strong is working to integrate the principles of SEDS into the regional plan, mainly by matching land use policy, infrastructure, and opportunity site analysis with the economic clusters that are prioritized by SEDS. Local governments have a critical role in supporting economic development efforts, and we know that each of our communities has its own look and feel. But when we are competing for business and assessing our educational needs, we are a region and we are competing as a metropolitan area, which means we need to come together to develop regional strategies. Through the outreach on the Southern Nevada Strong project, we've heard consistently from the community that a good public education and well-paying jobs are the top 2 priorities for the region, as Lisa indicated. This is from a range of stakeholders from low-income people all the way to community and business leaders. We are all interested in education, schools, workforce development, and economic development. Not all of our policies focus on place. They may focus on eligibility criteria for a category of services. But we know not all communities are succeeding, and because schools are physical installations in our communities and so important to our future workforce competitiveness, we wanted to learn more about how community development and placemaking around schools can support student learning environments. So we asked John Topogna to come to Southern Nevada to share some perspective on community development and education, and ask him to talk about the relationship between place-based approaches and student achievement. We also hope to hear from him on how we can push ourselves to take our priorities for the region plan even further to more directly support education and schools. John is president of Econ Northwest and oversees the firm's overall business strategy and operations. Since his arrival at Econ Northwest in 1997, Topogna has built practices in education, healthcare, human service, and tax policy. He has kept up on a wide range of data and student achievement, as well as led analysis for case study areas working to improve access to a quality education. Econ Northwest is a trusted advisor on the plan and is performing much of the analysis to support the policies proposed by the plan. So with that, please welcome John Topogna.
I'm wired up here. Yeah. Well, thank you. I was so excited to hear that I was going to have the opportunity to come to Las Vegas about a month ago. I'm a minority of West Coast males who have never been to Las Vegas in their lives. I'm very excited to be here. I love sun and mountains, and this is just a beautiful setting. I could just stare out the window all afternoon. One of my favorite statistics about Las Vegas I learned when I was in the Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps in Chile back in the mid-1990s. And about a year into that, I was becoming proficient enough in Spanish that I could read the newspaper, and I picked up the newspaper one day, the Santiago newspaper, and there was a story about Las Vegas. And a couple of paragraphs in was one of the most shocking statistics. As you sit in a sort of a Peace Corps experience, and you get the perspective of being in a small country, and I was in a rural part of that country, and then you hear stories about the United States, and you think about what people in that country think about the United States. And the statistic was there were more hotel rooms in one intersection of Las Vegas than there were in the entire country of Chile, which, you know, if you think of that as a Chilean reading that newspaper, that's staggering. One intersection. So very vibrant place, obviously a lot of energy the minute you walk off the plane, and a lot of energy here as I saw Lisa's RSVP start to come in and grow from 40 to 80 to I think 120. Very excited to be here, and quite a diverse group. I did want to ask before we get started, because we have lots of different kinds of people coming from different disciplines, how many sort of in the building educators do we have today? Yeah, and how many folks would consider themselves community developers or sort of from the nonprofit sector? And how about folks who are elected officials or work with for elected officials? And how many folks would consider themselves to be planners? There we go. All right. So quite a mix, and I think one of the key questions that we want to answer today, that Lisa wanted to make sure that we all left with a clear answer to, is: does it make sense for this collection of people to be meeting on a regular basis to help think about the joint activities that this community moves forward with to drive an education agenda and to improve the overall skill and human capital of the Las Vegas metropolitan area? So with that, let's launch in just a little bit on Echo Northwest. We do lots of different work. Lorelei here is helping Lisa a lot with the land use and classical planning parts of this effort. I, as was introduced, have built up an education practice. It's an economic consulting firm. We feel like we've got a little toolbox that we can move from sort of topic to topic and do quite a bit of work in education, direct program evaluation for alternative schools, even some randomized trials, et cetera. We're doing some work with the Gates Foundation to help them evaluate different approaches that they are taking across the country in terms of thinking about investments in teacher effectiveness versus Common Core implementation versus blended learning strategies, et cetera. And then lots of work with foundations in the Northwest as well. So the 4 questions for today are these. First, why the urgency right now to improve achievement and educational attainment? That almost feels like a given, like a question you don't need to ask, but it wasn't that long ago. When I was a kid in the 1970s, this book came out called The Overeducated American, published by Harvard Press. And in fact, statistically at that point in time, it wasn't that far off. We were a little bit overeducated and college premium wages were coming down. 40 years later, it's a very different story. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Second question is, what drives achievement inside and outside the building? Obviously, for all those educators in the room, a lot of the lifting is going on inside, and there's just been increasing accountability and pressure to get more and more and more results with not spectacularly growing budgets in recent times, and a lot of debate about that. But Lisa's point, and there are many non-educators that work in and around the buildings. So what are the roles of the community and of planners to think about how do you complement what is going on inside of that, inside the building? The third question, how can community developers, nonprofit leaders, and planners help educators improve college and career readiness? And then the last and important one is, should a group like this meet again? And if so, what would it talk about? And I think groups like this, maybe not this entire group, but subsets of this group, my sense, are meeting in Las Vegas, and I would contend and will contend at the end of this that you should continue and it should be expanded. So now, now the big piece, which is why are the planners and community developers getting into the business of economic development? Isn't that the economic development department? But here's the overall theory of action, is that if you start out at some point, you have a talented, flexible workforce in an appealing environment, and I think all of those of you who've settled here would agree that that's an aspiration, and that you're at a certain point of satisfaction with where you stand on that. If you have a talented, flexible workforce in an appealing environment, that's going to attract diverse, value-added industries that provide well-paying jobs. And those well-paying jobs are going to generate revenues for excellent schools, quality public services, and public facilities. And that will, in turn, attract more talented people and flexible workforce, and allow you to invest in that appealing environment. As we look at sort of this relationship between jobs and public revenue, if you look across the country generally, there's not a huge variation in the share of total personal income in a state or in a region that is spent on education. The variation is driven primarily by how much total personal income there is to begin with. So the more prosperous a community or a state becomes, the more they tend to invest in education, in the same way that they buy other goods and services, cars and houses, etc. So as a community becomes more prosperous, there's more to invest